We're here to talk about deconstructing financial innovation, what the current landscape looks like, what challenges exist in today's kind of innovation landscape, and how we are at Linqto spearheading innovation. So without further ado, we are welcoming Patty Brewer. Patty is our Chief Product Officer here at Linqto. She spent 10 years previously at Intuit, where she was strategic in launching several product initiatives and financial management solutions. We're also welcoming Matthew Rosendin. Matthew is our VP of Ledger here at Linqto. His background is in developing financial technologies. In 2008, he joined Ripple Labs, and in 2011, he co-founded Trustline. I hope I got that timeline right. Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong. And developed decentralized credit and interoperability protocols. We are also welcoming Agnes. Agnes is founder of Bluedge Ventures. She specializes in bridging gaps between legacy finance and blockchain-enabled solutions. Before that, she was at Consensus, and prior to that, she spent a decade at BlackRock. Agnes, you are moderating, so I will hand the mic over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. So yes, I'm very excited about this panel today. We're deconstructing, financial innovation, which is a very, very broad topic, and probably three of us can spend on it quite a bit of time. As Irina mentioned, my focus is pretty much blockchain investing. I was part of the Consensus and Ethereum ecosystem. Before that, I was in very traditional finance in blockchain. So these kind of two worlds are very different, and now they're starting to overlap. And we have seen this, looking in the past few years, we have seen this, how the market has really went through a shift, where we've seen the pandemic, which went and accelerated the technology that we never thought it could really happen. We, many of us, still in the offices, we're using cameras. Right now, we're all on Zooms, and everything is, remote. Everything is almost decentralized. We can work around the globe, and we can see this, innovation and, change in technology, in blockchain technology, how fast the adoption happened, how fast the investment space grew and happened. Now we've seen a little bit of a slowdown in both industry as well. But when you kind of look at it, how we grew and what we did, and how fast we adapted, it's absolutely fascinating to kind of see how the trends are happening. And before I kind of start talking about trends from like my end, I would like to hear Patty and actually Matt talking about a little bit the view and the trends that they are seeing in the technology. Patty, would you like to start?
Sorry, I just needed to unmute. Yeah, so we look at trends that obviously are going to impact how we look at our roadmap and innovation. I think some of the things that are on our minds, number one, because we're in the private equity space, we definitely are seeing more unicorns coming out, which is good for us, that more opportunity for companies that we can put on our platform. But we also are seeing companies take longer to IPO. So that's something that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, but it creates a longer runway for our investors. So we have always really wanted to provide liquidity for investors. So that's something that we're working on. That's going to be very key for our roadmap. In terms of other trends, obviously it's been spoken about a lot, but globalization of the world and the marketplace and kind of breaking down borders in terms of how people interact is key for us. Our international customer base has doubled. We're at about 30% right now, and we expect that to continue to grow. When you look across, our target customer, of course, are accredited investors, and there's 100 million of them across the globe. So really, we can't just rely on U.S. Even though there's a tremendous amount of wealth in the U.S., we have a lot of other countries, and many of which are non-English speaking countries. So that's something that we have to consider as we roll out more customers. How do we serve them, in their natural language, even though most speak English, but we want to be sensitive about that. As far as, and then I think going along with that, obviously cross-border payments, that's a trend that there's more and more expectations around being able to send and receive payments in a real-time way. Currently, when an international customer wants to buy an investment with us, They have to send an international wire, and that can take five or more days. We're not holding up the sale currently, but we will be moving to more of a T0, where as soon as the order is placed, it has to be funded, which means we're going to have our customers pre-fund their investments, and they're not going to want to take 5 days to do that. So we've got to figure out a way to enable faster cross-border payments. I think that's the things that are really on our top of mind right now.
Matthew?
Yeah, I can speak more to general trends that I've followed during my time at Trustline, and really that was where I was putting on my entrepreneurial hat and getting an idea for the landscape from the lens of an entrepreneur. And so, you saw all sorts of different trends going on in blockchain and crypto, and DeFi, decentralized finance, is one of those. DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations. I'm sure there's been discussion around these topics already throughout this conference, but when I started my journey, it was really like the advent of these new sort of developments in the space. And Agnes, you would probably know, like, DeFi summer was a thing that occurred when these technologies really started to explode. And you would see that with like Uniswap, which is this exchange. It's a decentralized exchange, and it was a new model for decentralized exchange that has now done over $1 trillion in total volume. And so there's just so many things that popped up, from different, stable coins, whether they be fiat backed or algorithmic or what have you, different lending protocols. So I really looked at this space, and for me personally, I saw that there was this huge gap between these new technologies and then the actual traditional financial world. And so it's always, throughout that whole journey, it had been like, okay, how do these new trends actually get adopted by this, traditional financial world? And that's really where my focus had been before I joined Linqto. And so now now that I'm here at Linqto, I'm kind of bringing that knowledge and those learnings throughout that journey. And throughout that journey, I had talked with, leaders and legal capacities who gave me advice on, how they see this landscape evolving and being adopted, and just going through the motions of trying to, understand the market. And all of that has influenced my thinking for these kinds of trends.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I focus mostly on investments in infrastructure of the blockchain. So pretty much, picks and shovels, where you look for better UX, UI, faster, easier. I'm really focusing on tools that are helping, developers from Web 2.0 go over to and build in 3.0, because as you know, it's still very complicated, very niche, very, space where there's a lot of learning curve required, but also there's a huge adoption that we're seeing from institutional investors, from JP Morgan looking, testing their Onyx platform to do instant settlement in the fixed income space. I think you're doing the test right now with a few of the Singaporean banks. You see a huge regulatory push after what happened with FTX, which is going to really transform the space and the technology in an unprecedented way, because I've seen the lack of regulation, or very, very thin layer of regulations, being really a big, roadblock for the technology. So right now, I am very excited to kind of see that acceleration in that space. So that's kind of another trend that I'm focusing on. And of course, I'm a big fan as, payments and DeFi, because I think there's a huge place for improvement. And I really see that institutional, companies like JP Morgan and BlackRock and others are slowly, maturely coming into that space, which is really exciting place to be in. So I'm definitely with you, especially Uniswap. I think I read it somewhere, please correct me. I think Uniswap moves as much money on a daily basis as Coinbase. And it's very interesting to compare the decentralized exchange with centralized exchange. And I think Uniswap is run by 30 people or something like that. And I think Coinbase 1,200, or well, right now a little bit less since they had some adjustments, which is fascinating to kind of see how this technology has changed, developed, and grew, and how we are looking at it. So looking at the challenges that exist in today's kind of innovation landscape, how are you guys looking at it? I know you have a very interesting background, so maybe we can, we'll go back to Patty.
Again, I would answer that strictly from Linqto's from the Linqto perspective in terms of the challenges. I mean, the good news is we have so much we can do. Like innovating and ideas are not the problem. The problem is, being able to do everything we want to do with the resources that we have. So, typically you have three levers. You have money, time, and scope. So we're constantly pulling back on the things we want to do because, we've got high priorities that we're working on right now. This ATS that I mentioned, this liquidity, that's our biggest priority. And along with that is this idea of a Linqto wallet that we're rolling out, which is going to facilitate that T0 funding that I mentioned. And those are the things that we're focused on, which means we have to kind of put a lot of other things on the back burner. So my biggest challenge as the product lead is just not being able to do everything that we want to do. We have a lot of requests from people within the company as well as our customers. So having to make those tough trade-offs is really the biggest challenge for us.
That's interesting. Matthew, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. These sorts of private equity exchange marketplaces, whatever you want to call them, at least to me, seem to be a relatively new thing in the market. And I think Linqto, as well as some others, I think Carta is doing something to that effect too, so I've heard. But I do think that Linqto is uniquely positioned to build out this product feature that does increase liquidity for our users, just through how we have set up the company, the infrastructure. It is unique to the other companies in this space. And I think, yeah, ultimately that's going to serve customers of Linqto really well once it's all done and built.
That's very interesting. So from my perspective as an investor, I think I will agree with the previous Matthew, is really a previous panelist is really vetting the early stage companies. I focus on seed round, A round, and B round. So once you get into infrastructure and start auditing and checking and reviewing the code, if you ever get access to it, and kind of going and digging through a lot of noise, because when the blockchain market is in the high place, there is a lot of things to dig through, before you get into the diamonds, which is, for me, it's a lifestyle. It's absolutely fascinating, but it is something that you kind of do every day. You kind of think about it every day, and that's kind of a challenge probably for every single investor. And then also making sure that companies, once you invest in the companies, I'm also very big on making sure that there is a operational excellence, there's a risk excellence, that there is a governance, that even though you are small startups, and even though you're decentralized, there are still laws and regulations of whatever country or jurisdiction you are in. There are laws and regulations around how to move money, how to do certain things. So I think this kind of operational excellence, making sure that the companies are growing up with it, that it's not an afterthought, it's actually a thoughtful process. I think that's another not only a challenging, but very much, time consuming thing to do. And, but it's very rewarding as well, because once you set up everything in the right way, then, the chances of successful startups are much, much higher. And how would you guys kind of advise investors on how to evaluate fintech companies based on, on kind of their innovation strategy, but also on what you guys seeing, because you're seeing a lot of different things, so you can kind of speak to almost like a lot of different kind of levels of that.
I mean, I would just say, obviously, innovation strategy is just one thing an investor's going to want to consider, and there's a lot of other people that are more experts on what investors should look for. But on the innovation strategy, I think, and this is kind of how we look at it, because we're looking at companies, and the companies that we choose to put on our platform, we're looking at companies that are doing really exciting things in really fast-growing sectors. So we have a tremendous amount. All the companies are in tech in some way, but most of them are, or we have a lot of companies in the digital assets, because this is a very exciting space. There's a lot of great companies doing things that are innovative, and their strategy is, they've identified a problem. They know what problem they're solving. They have both a macro and a micro view of what that problem is and how to solve it. I think they're using good judgment in terms of legal compliance and regulatory issues that they need to be aware of. And they're innovating and developing in a way that's using the latest technology. So those are the things, I think, from an innovation strategy that you're going to want, to be looking at.
Absolutely. Matthew?
Yeah, I'd love to add, while I completely agree with what you said, Agnes, about, operational governance, compliance sort of excellence, that's very critical. I mean, at least from my perspective, kind of companies need to be able to manage the risk of this space. It is very exciting, and there's a lot going on. And that's why it's so critical, because managing the risk effectively through those sorts of control structures, whether it be governance or operational procedures, internal policies, and things to that effect, is critical. I mean, FTX is a prime example of like what not to do, because they didn't have any of those structures in place. But also from the perspective of investors, as you mentioned, that's definitely what you would want to look for. And I would say, the whole regulatory picture as well, how to kind of, everyone needs to have a regulatory strategy, because it's not very clear how it all plays out. And, I think what interests me in terms of how different companies can play it out is, there's different routes you can take, and with the winds of regulation changing in whichever direction they're blowing, you could imagine different paths you might take as a company. So you might want to build on the public blockchain infrastructure. You might want to do like a private blockchain consortium type of model. And it really depends on, like, if you're a bigger company and you're less willing to take risk, or if you're a small startup and you're willing to take on that kind of risk. But, I guess the return on that investment would be somewhat commensurate with the risk. So I just find that whole dynamic really fascinating.
Absolutely, and I agree with you 100%. I think innovation is something that, regardless if you're a large or small company, is really something important that you need to take a look into. Obviously, like you and I are in blockchain, so we are in the cutting edge technology space that is extremely transformative. So for us, innovation is almost not even a second nature; it's a first nature. And failure is not seen as a failure; it's pretty much an experiment that we learn from. And I think this is a specific mindset that where you are sometimes, when you're in a large corporation, it's sometimes very difficult to not only start but kind of carry forward. But at the end of the day, when we look at every single every single crisis were almost like bailed out by innovation. In 2000, when we've seen that dot-com bubble, the economy grew because there were a bunch of innovative companies and startups that went and started building these things that became giants of today's world. Then we look into financial crisis of 2008, and we see companies that started building during that time, which is WhatsApp, which is Facebook, which is Snowflake, and others. And now we see how they transformed the way we live and what kind of returns they brought. And right now we are seeing a slowdown as well in traditional markets and blockchain and crypto markets. But for example, usage of, I think, smart contracts that went up by almost 40% in comparison to 2020. So you use smart contracts only if you build. So I'm a very kind of bullish on investing in those kind of times, because that's where you see the spark of the innovation, transformation, and really exceptional growth in the next 5 to 10 years that we will be witnessing. So I would like to learn a little bit more about your, business and innovation strategy of kind of your company. If you can kind of go a little bit deeper into that and tell us a little bit more about that, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, I think let me first start with just reiterating what our mission is, which is, our vision is to make private equity investing simplified. And our mission is to democratize private equity investing. We do this by opening up more access to more investors with more affordable pricing. And as I've mentioned, very soon we will be providing liquidity. And that's going to be a big piece of our value proposition, because really we'll be the only investment platform where you can purchase equity in a private company and get liquidity for that investment without having to wait for an exit. So I'd say one of the key pieces of our innovation strategy is first really having clear vision of the problem that we're solving. So, interesting thing about Linqto is we've existed as a company for quite a while, and it wasn't until about 2017, 18 that we started to work with Creative Forum, and we saw the problem that we're now solving, which is access and the lack of affordability for the average investor to invest in private equity was really limited to the very, very, very wealthy. And even if you could get in on investment, you were going to end up putting a couple $100,000 or more. So we saw that problem, and we started to launch this current product in February of 2020. So for us, it's really clarity on that problem and making sure that everything we're doing is in service of that problem. Our the way we go about innovating, a lot of this is process. For me, I'm a process person. But again, once you kind of have that vision of what the problem is you're solving, we form hypotheses, and we go out and test them very quickly. We have a process where we just like this liquidity feature, we know that that's a problem. We know people want it, but how do we really build a solution? How do we build it in a way that's going to be optimized for the customer? So we, came up with different ideas and thoughts. We went out and created, either prototype test or even paper prototypes, got feedback very quickly from our customers. So customer-driven innovation is very important for us. And then, we narrow it down, and then we can then take those. Once we've validated our hypotheses through insights and data, then we can go out and build it. And so that's the process we're in right now. We also use a strategy of the Lean Startup, which was the book written by Eric Ries, where we tend to launch a minimum viable product before we really scale into a fully V1 version of that product. So a lot of times what you'll see if you're a customer is you'll just see us launch something, and it's not, God doesn't have everything that we eventually want to roll out, but we roll out the minimum set of features so that we can get learnings as quickly as possible in production with actual users using it the way they would normally use it. So that's kind of the key pieces of how we innovate and how we build product.
That sounds great. And Matt, could you elaborate a little bit on your kind of a way of having more of a democracy in the private equity investing, because private equity, it is very, not extremely transparent a way of investing, especially historically. And so could you kind of talk, because what I feel you're doing, it's just you're bringing a little bit more of openness and transparency and democracy into this kind of system and process.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the end goal. And today on our platform, we have lower investment minimums than what is traditional in private equity, where you can invest like say $10,000 to make your investment on Linqto versus $250,000 elsewhere. So there's actually a variety of factors where we are making it, expanding access and democratizing this asset class. But on the transparency kind of that side of things, that's a part that really I think is important too. Now, like in a lot of traditional finance, you don't have that level of transparency. And so if I can just extrapolate, a little bit in terms of how I envision that this whole blockchain thing will play out as far as it relates to us, but really anyone in capital markets, I believe, will be impacted. So it really starts with, if we're talking about the equity asset class, the companies start out private. They have their first round of equity financing if they're going that route. And so there's all sorts of platforms today that will allow these startups to conduct their primary raise on a blockchain platform. And so those shares are basically issued on blockchain. So Provenance is a blockchain created in a consortium with Figure, I think, is one of those that do this issuance on the blockchain for primary. But how that relates to us is, it's a, provenance of shares. So how can we really like trace every single transaction back to where they originated from, right? And so I think that's like the future vision of blockchain is like you issue shares on the blockchain when you're raising money, and every time that changes hands, that's recorded on the blockchain. And so that certainly would apply to us as well, where anyone who buys through the Linqto platform, that would be recorded on blockchain. And I'm not saying this is, it's this we don't have the infrastructure really from like a regulatory level just yet in terms of like how you do security tokenization and all of that. It's not really quite there yet, but it's what I'm spending a lot of time thinking about. And so really there's this whole like chain of being able to trace like transactions or shares and the provenance, and being able to fully and transparently account for all of that. And I think that's going to bring a lot of trust, and it'll even enable better decision making and things of that nature.
Well, looking at the market in general, as we were kind of speaking, especially blockchain technology, we already see that, as I was mentioning, JP Morgan is looking to settle their trades T+0, T+ pretty much few hours, which is going to be huge. And they're testing this with quite a few large banks. We already seen, movement of money, especially, being easier, faster, and less expensive. Now we're seeing also some of the loans being issued on Providence, as you mentioned, which is again additional, check to everything that you're kind of thinking about it and trying to put together. And on top of it, regulations are going to change, adjust, and will be definitely more of a helping hand going forward, since I'm expecting them to be much more clear. So you and your company can pretty much go and build what you just discussed. And there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's very complicated. As we kind of talk about it, everybody makes, you made it sound so easy, we're just going to go and do this. And when my brain started going into that kind of depth of it, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be fascinating, but it's going to be really, really a lot of work. So
I think this is really about a journey. We're on a journey,
Yeah.
right? And so
absolutely.
Matt came in and started talking about blockchain. And I remember for me, I was like, okay, how's this going to work for our product? Yep. And we actually started the process to build out this ATS on the blockchain. And then we made the decision, you know what, let's just kind of stick with our current stack. Because we're going to be able to move more quickly. We learned a lot in the process of just kind of doing what we were doing. But I think the next step will be to move our current ATS onto blockchain. And then, we're ready and we're positioned for when, we get to the point that Matt mentioned where, regulations maybe change, and now more securities can be tokenized, not just our, the things that we sell, the unit subscriptions that we sell. So it's all about really getting along the journey and being positioned well for when other macroeconomic factors happen that we can then take advantage of.
Absolutely. So pretty much, you're providing more transparency. You're making the, private equity more like a public equity. You're giving investors really the opportunity to take control over their portfolio and how they're diversified and how they're investing, and providing really access to what they really couldn't access before, which is absolutely fascinating. And could we kind of focus a little bit more on, what influences your pretty much roadmap strategy? Can you elaborate a little bit more about it? Because you're a very interesting combination of private equity investments, blockchain technology, and so please, that would be great to hear more about that.
Yeah, I'll speak from my point of view. I mean, first and foremost, it's our customers. They're our biggest influence.
Always.
But we're also looking at those trends, the trends that we talked about earlier, that in terms of private equity, it's not just limited to private equity, but the globalization of markets and the expectations around real-time settlement. And we really, it goes back to part of our vision, which is democratizing private equity, but really making the private market exchange, our private market exchange, function like a public market. So that means someone can come in, they can get real-time pricing, they can make a purchase, get funded immediately, and they can own those shares immediately. Well, we already have most of that. It's just that T+0 that's not quite there, and the liquidity piece that's not quite there. So that's what's really influencing our market in terms of what we're trying to solve. And of course, we have to look at the macro picture of, the regulatory environment, what's happening across the different international communities, and how does that impact us. We have to, we can only, an investor has to be accredited. So we have to keep up on every accreditation rule in every country. So there's a lot of maintenance of that. And again, the payments piece is key for us right now in terms of how we're thinking about our roadmap and making sure that we can get to that T+0.
That's fantastic. Matt?
Yeah, so one important thing to understand, our CEO, Bill Saris, says, we wouldn't be where we are today as a company doing as much revenue as we're doing if we had started out on blockchain. And so we're trying to migrate towards, putting all of our systems on blockchain, but it's just a matter of the fact that we've been able to scale more quickly because we've just the whole kind of system is so used to the traditional way of doing things, and so that's why we've been able to scale so quickly. But I will say that, we're going to do this migration towards blockchain, and I can understand the frictions of many different companies out there who are probably thinking the same thing, and understanding that moving onto the blockchain is not particularly easy yet at this point. There's still more infrastructure that needs to be there, or at least the cost needs to be brought down, and all of that will help companies transition towards blockchain. But it does require the technical resources, and being able to have all of the different pieces that you need to have in place. And so, like, we have a plan for how to do this. It's like Patty said earlier, there's so much that we want to do, and so I think there really is like opportunity for more innovation in the general infrastructure space in order to, move all of these different companies that will be doing the same exact migration. And in my view, like Linqto is we're still one of the first really to like be adopting this technology. I know we've been saying, blockchain is this new thing, and but it's like still to this day, it really feels that way. And there's a lot of work that has to be done. But in order to get to that, end state where we have this whole completely like interconnected system that are using these blockchain interfaces to do their 24/7, 365 real-time atomic transactions, and globally, and also potentially utilizing DeFi technology. So, for example, we had looked at Uniswap, and what's fascinating about them is they have this concept of automated market maker. And so this is a really cool technology. As I said earlier, they have done all of this volume, like over $1 trillion since inception. And we are taking this approach, as Patty was saying, where it's being driven by the customer. We want to like look at ways how our ATS can provide that liquidity to customers, and provide more liquidity and better pricing. And that's all a part of how we're building out the ATS, what's under the hood. And so kind of looking at AMM technologies and like how we can foster more liquidity in the market in the ATS is really important. And so we're kind of looking at these concepts and looking to see how we can apply these new technologies, maybe first off-chain, but ultimately, once we do the migration and that's complete, towards being on-chain, and then maybe we get connected to different partners in some way, because once you're on-chain and other people are too, then it's really easy to just connect and kind of have those different, channel partnerships, or providing different services for whatever you may need as a company. So, there's a lot of work to do, but it's going to be really, really exciting.
Absolutely, you will be very busy. And I agree with you. I think the strategy of going first off-chain to test a lot of different things is really not only the good way to do it, but also a very economic way to do it. And then once kind of exactly, how this will work and how this will flow, then you can go to more of a public chain and be able to kind of work in consensus with everybody else. So that's absolutely fascinating. So I think, I guess we're kind of coming to the end. I'm watching the clock, so please let me know if I'm running over. But my final question, I guess, the final thoughts we just kind of take a look at is, the world has changed. We look through the trends, we look through the technology changing, investments changing, and how are we looking at, what are the other kind of ideas that you guys are exploring, like given all the changes, all the trends, and everything that we discuss here, which is quite a bit.
I mean, I think we pretty much laid out the four, I guess, of the strategic things that we're looking at. So just to reiterate them, we're the ATS, which also comes with this new wallet, which supports or enables T0. But as Matt described, we will eventually migrate all that onto the blockchain in some way to create a true exchange. And then part of that is this idea that he mentioned on the AMM, which really allows that kind of real-time pricing and real-time liquidity. Today, when we launch ATS, it's more of an auction style. So somebody, if you're selling your shares, you're going to put them up, you're going to list them, and it's going to be set at a price, and you have to wait for somebody to come and buy it. But with AMM, there's liquidity there where when you go to sell, you can get an automated price right away and sell them right away. And again, that's kind of the goal, to make our platform behave more like a public platform. So, but really, besides those things, that's really what our focus is for 2023.
It's good to be focused. Matt, anything to add?
Patty basically covered it. Those are the priorities, and it's just incredibly exciting to be working on these technologies. I'm very happy to be at Linqto, where the leadership team is so forward thinking and moving in this direction. It's really great.
Thank
Fantastic.
you. I'm going to add something here now. I always like to come in and have a little bit of a curveball, and because Patty and Matt are on the spotlight here, they have to actually have to respond and talk to me, maybe, or put themselves out. But if this is in context with Agnes, your investing experience with BlackRock and the various other companies that you work with, and then putting this into perspective for a startup growing rapidly like Linqto is, when you start to look at this, and I hear what Patty's saying. Hey, we're reacting to what we think, what the customers are telling us that they want, but we also have to be cognizant of the international markets. And we're using technologies, according to Matthew and Patty, that are upcoming and growing and are versatile. But the real question becomes is as you look at companies like this in similar growth style, and you think about all the nuances that are involved, our customers today are not the same customers that we will have 5 years from today. Neither will the markets be in the same place. So how much time, Patty, Matthew, do you actually, and you don't have to answer this right away, do you actually have subsectors of research that's looking not between now and 3 years, but 3 years to 5 years? And I'll let Agnes can answer this one first. As you look at the companies that you're funding, do you actually pay attention to how the technology department or what they're doing in terms of the future plan?
So I am a big fan of really, and I have a lot of friends who are in the fields of pretty much studying of how we consume technology. So I always look at how are the next Gen Z, Gen Alpha, how are they consuming the technology? How are they using it? Like, for example, my big indicator for it, and I don't want to generalize it, but I will do a little bit. When I look at kind of countries and societies, I always look at it like, who is adopting gaming? How fast the gaming will spread? How young are the kids that are getting into the roadblocks and other? Because that will kind of show you the trend of how certain areas are excited about technology, how easy it is going to be for them to adapt going forward. And for me, like when I look at companies as well, is the way I look at their consumer base. It's not what's gonna happen today, tomorrow. Is what is their next consumer base? Is this going to be, are these going to be Gen Zs, but just 10 years older? So you kind of look at the trend of, again, how they're interacting with technology, how they're consuming technology, because that's going to give you a great indicator one of the indicators going forward, how fast certain technologies will be used or not. So that's the angle I like to sometimes take a look at through.
On the heels of that, Patty, how are your organization, your department looking at certain things like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's always a real tension between short-term and long-term. And I have found that in prior lives, companies I work for always wanted to do long-term planning and spend a lot of time, what are we going to do in 3 years? What are we going to do in 5 years? I find that, while you obviously have to be out looking ahead, and you have to be, understanding the trends in terms of actual innovation and roadmap. I feel like we need to be really, responsive and quick. So we don't really go too far out past 12 months on our roadmap. But the question of what do we do to just understand what's going on and kind of look ahead, it's a challenge. I'll be quite honest, because we are so heads down and focused on that, next 6 months. But we were just talking about it today in my team about, being able to take some time at least once a quarter and just, whether it's an offsite or whatever we can do as a team. Sorry about the noise. And really, and look at some of these trends and try to understand how our business is going to change because of all these, global shifts, demographic shifts, and technology shifts. So we have to understand what's going on, but we don't do a lot of developing and innovation that far out in advance.
Yeah, so thank you. We're at time, but it's something to think about as we look at the changes that are happening on the landscape, the digitization, the generational wealth transfer that's going to happen. If we're going to innovate and disrupt the current capital markets, what does that look like? And what are those future legacy wealth has been created? How are they going to transfer that to the next cohort of investors, right? So that would be something interesting. Agnes, thank you so much. Patty, Matthew, thank you so much for being here today. It's been awesome. I've learned so much, and I appreciate your time.